Kentaro Miura once said that he never expected his work to blow up in the way that it did. Of course, this just speaks to how humble he is as a person, because the fact of the matter is, Kentaro Miura was so absurdly talented that it would have felt like an anomaly for him to not go on and do great things in his life. So, what's the story here? How did he make one of the greatest manga in history that to this day have helped inspire the likes of Final Fantasy VII and Dark Souls? Well, it all begins way back in the 1960s, where Miura was just a little boy, and from a young age, he was surrounded by art. Naturally, given both of his parents' occupations. His father was a commercial storyboard artist, and his mother was an art teacher. I guess you could say the apple didn't fall far from the tree, because often Miura would find himself in the corner during class drawing in his notebook. And this passion for art was only fueled further by his love of manga. So much so that in 1976, at only 10 years old, he would draw his first ever manga titled Miura. Now, granted, this manga wasn't in the pages of a popular magazine or anything, but it was in a school publication, and the art is genuinely not what you would expect out of a child, let alone the fact that this manga would run for 40 volumes. It's kind of hard to see because the image is kind of blurry, but I mean, just look at this Kamen Rider looking guy. The detail is really something, and considering what he would draw later in his life, this attention to detail would only become more and more meticulous. This love of creating manga would follow him all the way to high school, where in 1982, he would meet Koji Mori, the future author of Holy Land, and who would go on to become a lifelong friend of Miura's. It was here that he decided that he wanted to take manga seriously and pursue it as a career. So him and Mori would attempt to get a science fiction manga published into Weekly Shonen Sunday, but it would be promptly rejected. Wow, if I was the guy who made that decision, in hindsight, I'd probably be kicking myself. But that was only a small hiccup for Miura, because shortly after, he would go on to become an assistant for George Morikawa, the now legendary mangaka responsible for Hajime no Ippo, though at the time, Morikawa had not yet become famous.
At my first weekly magazine job, we had 0 staff, and he came to help me out. I didn't know how well he could draw, so I showed him some of my own art and asked him to copy it. I was stunned by the results. His age utterly belied his talent. When he showed me that sketchbook I mentioned, I got goosebumps. It was just that good. There were pictures of a fairy, some kind of brand, and a warrior with a giant sword. His art, drawn with a thick pencil, overwhelmed the senses.
Miura was, in fact, so good that Morikawa would inevitably let him go from his assistant position, feeling as though there was nothing he could teach Miura that he didn't already know. So, how fitting it would be that after this happened, Miura would go on to win the 34th Newcomer Manga Award from Weekly Shonen Magazine for his one-shot Futatabi, which he would use for his application to Nihon University. The year was now 1988, and Miura was working under Yoshiyuki Okamura, another now legendary mangaka who at this point was famous for Fist of the North Star. Undoubtedly a dream come true for the young Miura, who had been following the series since he was in high school. And interestingly enough, a series that would serve as inspiration for something that had been cooking in Miura's mind ever since he was a teenager. In that same year, Miura would release Berserk, or at least what would eventually become Berserk. Berserk, the prototype, is exactly what it sounds like. Essentially the rough draft of the Berserk we all know and love. And while not everything is the same, Guts even has an eye patch in this version of the story, in this prototype, you can see that many elements we all know and love in Berserk were there from the beginning. Like Guts' giant sword, Puck, the brand, the overall tone. It's clear that these specific details had always been swimming around in Miura's mind for a while. And just a year later, in 1989, Miura would finally bring us the final version of Berserk. Now, Miura had many inspirations for Berserk, Fist of the North Star, as we already know, being one of the biggest. That said, there are several pieces of dark and violent media that played into the creation of Berserk, like Go Nagai's Violence Jack, as well as the Hellraiser films. One of his most interesting influences, however, has to be the work of famous painters M.C. Escher and Hieronymus Bosch, both of which served as inspiration for the more chaotic and surrealist art you see in Berserk. I mean, he pretty blatantly blatantly pays homage to both of them during some of the most key moments in the story. However, one of the things that I think makes Berserk so special is that despite the series' reputation, it isn't just dark and edgelord things that went into Berserk's creation. Miura was actually a really big fan of cute and girly things. I mean, this is the guy that got addicted to Idolmaster during one of Berserk's breaks, so yeah. Believe it or not, quite a bit of shoujo manga served as an influence for Berserk, such as the Song of Wind and Trees and the Rose of Versailles. I mean, Griffith was heavily inspired by Lady Oscar from the latter series, and you can see these shoujo elements depicted not only in the way that Miura draws softer and more feminine characters, but in how he tells the story.
Shoujo manga is all about expressing every feeling powerfully, and in that sense, it's not as contrived as manga for men. Men's manga tends to come off as more calculated to sell well, whereas shoujo manga are somehow just fluffier.
And reading Berserk, I understand exactly what he means. During the more intimate moments in Berserk, whether they're romantic or not, the emotions of the characters are basically screaming at you. And often, it doesn't even need to be explicitly stated, you can just see it in the characters. Berserk is known for its incredible character writing, but the crazy thing is that early on, essentially none of this was planned. The only concrete things that were there since Berserk's inception was Guts, Puck, and the brand of sacrifice. But past that, really the only thing Miura knew he wanted was to tell a story about anger. And that's basically what we see within the first 3 volumes. But a lot of the things that make Berserk what it is today, that wasn't even on Miura's mind yet. For instance, he had no idea how Guts was going to lose his arm and his eye. He didn't know that the demon child was going to be Guts' son. He didn't even have Griffith in mind until volume 3. And even then, he hadn't fully mapped out his descent into evil. He didn't have the Band of the Hawk planned yet. Hell, he didn't even know Guts and Casca were going to get together. During the earlier parts of Berserk's story, he was basically flying by the seat of his pants. And yet, he created the Golden Age arc. Yeah, he essentially pulled one of the greatest story arcs in manga history out of his ass. That is just a testament to his skills as a storyteller. A skill that you could argue is rivaled only by his abilities as an artist. I am of the opinion that what separates a good artist from a great one is the ability to observe the world around you and how people and things interact with each other. And this is something that Miura was a master at, often observing things, doodling them down, and seeing how he can potentially use them in his manga. For instance, a lot of reference for the way that Guts moves, especially when he's fighting, comes from Miura's time in college when he would visit Koji Mori at his martial arts practices. According to Miura, he had this uncanny ability to view a 3D object in his mind, spin it around, and draw it from any angle. An ability that Koji Mori described as weird, and something that I'm sure many artists would be incredibly envious of. This is how he's able to draw things so immaculately. Additionally, I would say that a lot of the raw, visceral pain that's depicted in Berserk stems from Miura's observations as a child.
When we were children in the Showa period, there were motorcycle gangs and Yankees in the streets, and there were dangerous places, and even children could get beaten up by someone even if they lived a normal life. It was a very real experience to see something painful through your body. I think my physical senses from that have remained.
Miura had always been meticulous when it came to his art, and this can be seen all over the pages of Berserk. He'd always been of the belief that the more you draw, the better you get at it. And so he would draw constantly, not stopping until he ran out of ideas to put down on paper. And often, according to him, this would spiral out of control, to the point that he would spend days on a single 2-page spread. Even when he switched to more modern digital means of drawing his art, something that was supposed to quicken the process, it actually lengthened it. Due to being given even more tools to work with, he ended up putting even more detail into his art. And this is what contributed to many of the long delays that Berserk would suffer during the latter parts of its story. But the results are some of the greatest pieces of art to ever exist within manga. Kentaro Miura was just on another plane of existence in this regard, and because of this, Berserk would go on to become a smash success. As of this video, Berserk has sold around 70 million units worldwide, making it not only the most successful manga to ever run in Young Animal, but the single most successful seinen manga to ever be published by Hakusensha. In fact, in 2017, Michael Gambos, the director of international publishing and licensing for Dark Horse Comics, stated that Berserk is their best-selling product. And this was further backed by ICV2 in 2021, where Berserk was still on top. Which is crazy because Dark Horse doesn't even make Berserk. They just translate it and publish it outside of Japan. That's just how iconic and beloved this series is. And unfortunately, its creator would not live to see it to completion. On May 6th, 2021, Kentaro Miura would pass away due to an acute aortic dissection, a tear in the inner wall of the aorta. And just like that, one of the biggest names in the manga industry was gone. Fans from all over the world would grieve one of the greatest storytellers to ever live, and many fellow mangaka would give their grievances, including Miura's lifelong friend, the man who helped inspire the relationship between Guts and Griffith, Koji Mori. In the wake of Miura's death, Mori would draw a one-shot manga in memoriam for his friend, following through their teenage years up to the current day. And when you read this manga, you can just feel the pain and loss that Mori is feeling after losing his lifelong friend, a man that he had tremendous respect for. And it's because of his respect for Miura that Koji Mori, as well as Miura's talented team of artists, are continuing Berserk's story. We know during the early parts of Berserk that Miura hadn't planned a lot. However, at some point later on, he did make rough outlines for how he wanted the series to unfold, and had even told Mori how he wanted the series to end. And while it won't be exactly what Miura had in mind, it will be as close as it can possibly be. And I can only imagine the pressure that Mori and the Berserk team are feeling, but I'm confident in saying that I don't think Miura would have wanted it any other way. And with all that said, there's one last thought I'd like to leave off on. Miura once said that after he got done working on a piece of art, whether it be a volume cover or a huge 2-page spread, he didn't get a lot of time to appreciate it. In fact, outside of using past materials for references, he didn't really go back to admire his past work at all. With the nature of the manga business, he just didn't have time and had to move on to whatever was next on the docket. The only time he ever said he'd be able to admire his work is when Berserk ends. And in hindsight, that thought is really, really depressing. But at the same time, look at how much Miura's work has impacted the world. Look at how many people have read his story, been moved by his characters, and affected by his influence. So even if he never got the time to admire his own art, I hope that he can rest easy, knowing that countless others have.